Let's see. Let me. I don't have a chart for you. I've been just started working on it here, but I'll switch it up here.
So he would be in the tomb then, starting Thursday night, Thursday day, Friday night, Friday day, Saturday night, Saturday day, and right before sundown, that would start Sunday. That's when he would rise from the dead. So that would put him in the tomb for exactly 72 hours.
Yeah, and then you have him rising on the Sabbath, and the Bible says that he was risen early the first day of the week.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say when he rose. It said the women got there early in the morning when he had.
I think it's Mark 16:9.
Which one? Which verse?
Now when Jesus was risen early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils.
Right, but that doesn't have to read as that he was risen. It said now when he was risen. In other words, already past tense.
Risen is a present tense. The way that English reads is, if you put it, like if you said was raised or risen, I'm trying to think how you'd put that. It's an action verb.
But then you would have Jesus being in the tomb for 3 nights and 4 days.
That's what I'm saying. That's why it can't work for Wednesday.
No, I think it works perfect with Wednesday. If Jesus stayed in the tomb till Sunday morning, that's the next day. That's another day. It would count as another day. But a lot of people don't say it has to be specifically 3 days and 3 nights. I don't know why.
I think a lot of people assume that he rose just before Mary got there. Like minutes.
And he didn't have to.
But that's how everything is portrayed.
They got there very early when it was probably still dark. Now, if they got there when it was still dark and Jesus wasn't there, then he was resurrected at night. And that's the Sabbath. But no, it's not the Sabbath.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes along with what you were saying there, Rob, about the light coming from the dark. Right?
For
everything comes out of the darkness.
Yeah, it seems like it. It just seems like that's the theme of the Bible.
Yeah, so why wouldn't Christ keep it up with him coming from the dark into the light?
Yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. That's why it says like right at sunrise or whatever. That's why I kind of take it like
right at sunrise. Where does it say that? Doesn't it say they got there at sunrise?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no way to know for sure. I don't think. It just, two and two together type thing.
But he had already risen. We just don't know when he rose.
Right. So if he had risen at night, like during, when during sundown, then he would be in the tomb for 3 days and 4 nights.
Okay. See, I made a quick thing for you, Matthew. Here's Wednesday. You got him crucified on Wednesday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 1 day, 2 day, 3 days. If he raises any time after that, that would be 4 days. Even if he raises right on here on 3 days, he's rising on Saturday night or morning, however you want to look at it. So I don't see how you can have him rising on Wednesday crucifixion and have it be 3 days. It's going to have to be 4 or 5.
So wait, hang on. I mean, I have a hard time looking at your chart. I'm not really great with charts, but when I made my own chart, I followed it because I made it. When I
See how I've got your count that you gave, the 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. That's the way you explained it.
Well, on the 14th, where you have daylight, where the H is, or the 14th in the blue, if Jesus is crucified then, toward, almost at the dark of the 15th, but not quite, right? So
Right.
now,
Where do I put this according? It seems like you're saying that he rose right here.
so hang on. So if he was crucified on, like where you have it, where you have the cross,
Mm-hmm.
he would be in the tomb on the 15th night and day. So that's one night.
Hang on, Rob, can you make that stay up there? Like share your screen or something? Yeah.
Just click my
Click on his
thing, and mine will stay up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. There we go.
So you're saying something like this, then?
So hang on. I don't know if what you're portraying is what I'm saying, because I can't see where you're moving. It's kind of. So the 15th night, then day. 16th night, then day. 17th night, then day. Now the 17th would be, hang on, if you have this as Wednesday, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So he's in the tomb, and then right where the H is of the 17th on Saturday, that's when I believe he rose. That's exactly 3 days and 3 nights after the 14th. That would put him in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. Exactly.
So the 17th, the night of the 17th.
No, on the 17th, the day before the night of the 18th. The 18th would be a Sunday, which just is exactly what Rob has there. And most people say he rose on Sunday. And if he did, then that would be an extra night. You'd have to add a night to the 3 days and 3 nights.
So the Lord's Day wouldn't be on Sunday anymore then?
No, I believe the Lord's Day is on Sunday. They started to call Sunday, the first day of the week, the Lord's Day. But that doesn't mean he rose on the Lord's Day. I believe he rose on Saturday. Like when the women got there, he had already been risen.
But think about, you go back to the problem then, they would have had to talk about doing the Passover on the 13th.
Well, again, you have the problem of Jesus being the fulfillment of the Passover and dying as the Passover at the same time that the lambs get killed. But at the same time, you've got to eat the Passover with the disciples. You can't do both at the same time.
Unless there's 2 different calendars.
Unless there's 2 different calendars, right. And which calendar is right? If you go by what God told them in Leviticus, then they were supposed to kill the lamb on the 14th, eat it, and rest on the 15th during the first day of unleavened bread.
Yeah. So I guess you guys are talking about this what day Jesus rose or something, or when he died?
I guess both. Rob was showing me a chart that he was working on here.
Gotcha. And so you were saying, like, I remember you were saying that he rose on Saturday, right?
Yeah, I believe he was crucified on the 4th. I believe that the day, biblical day, starts with evening. So that's if you don't believe that, then what I'm saying won't make any sense at all. But I think on the 14th, during the day, he was crucified, but before sundown, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus buried him. So his 3 days and 3 nights began.
I put up Zach's view. I'm just going to step away for a moment.
It began on the first day of unleavened bread, because Jesus is the bread without sin. So then if you count exactly 72 hours, that puts his resurrection at the same time of the day before sundown, which would begin.
And it would be Saturday, right?
It would be on the Saturday. And then when the women get there, it doesn't say when he rose. It just says that he was already risen when they get there, and they get there really early.
And I remember I had brought it to you before, but Luke chapter 24 actually says that it was the same day that he rose, which was the first day of the week.
Which verse is that? I want to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's where if Jesus rose on a Saturday, you would be wrong. And in my mind, I mean, it would be Jesus was in the ground for 4 days. Let me just pull up on the Bible.
When I was studying this years ago, I haven't looked at it in a while, but when I was studying it years ago, it seemed to me that the synoptics and John differed,
Yeah,
and that was really confusing.
yeah. I think it's because there's two different calendars. The Jews, I mean, I can go into the calendar topic, but the Jews were keeping a Babylonian calendar. That's like, again, Jesus rebuked them for their traditions. And, even the Jewish calendar now, there's a tradition. The Hallel calendar is literally it's not scriptural whatsoever. They have 13 months. There's no such thing as 13.
Well, what's interesting here is it says, saying the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day, rise again.
Yeah, so with that quote right there, I think it's perfect to go into Luke chapter 24 to show you that third day. See,
That is
again,
Luke 24.
So Matthew, yeah, Luke 24. So Matthew would say that, he rose on the Saturday. But when you look at Luke, it seems like it's Sunday. And the reason why I say that is because verse 1, it says, "But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they went to the tomb, and taking spices they had prepared." So again, it says it's the first day of the week, so it's Sunday. So, but you could say, okay, he already resurrected the day before.
Right. It doesn't say when he
But
resurrected.
now watch this. Now watch this. So you keep going. Go to verse 13 where it talks about the two people on the road to Emmaus. So verse 13 says, "That very day, two of them were going." Now, if we were to go through the whole context, when it says that very day, it's literally Sunday. The context.
Where are you at, Zach?
Luke 24:13. So it's the same day that Jesus. It's the Sunday. So it says, in verse 13, it says, "That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, 'What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?' And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, 'Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?' And he said to them, 'What things?' And they said to him, 'Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word of God, before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped." Now this is the main verse right here, verse 21. "But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things had happened."
Oh, yeah.
So it's Sunday, and these people are saying this is the third day since these things have happened. So Jesus resurrected on Sunday, which was the third day. See, one of the problems that I think is that Matthew, what is it, 12:40, where it says 3 days and 3 nights, and we take that as 72 hours perfectly. I don't think we have to do that. Even if you think it logically, you go, okay, so he's going to be in the earth for 72 hours perfectly. Well, right, one millisecond past 72 hours is the fourth day, because 3 days have ended. Now you're into the fourth day. So,
well, it doesn't have to be exactly 72 hours because, the day, as long as he's in there for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, I would rather take the 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus talked about literally than try to know exactly what the disciples meant by it's been, or it's 3 days since all these things happened. You don't know exactly what they mean. Like, I would not use that verse to come up with anything specific.
Well, wouldn't you say Jesus spoke in parables? So you can't say that when Jesus said 3 days and 3 nights, that's literal. That could just again be symbolic of being on the earth.
We
Doesn't
can't say,
necessarily.
I mean, yes, John says without a parable he did not speak. I think that's a little hyperbolic when he says that, because no, Jesus didn't speak only in parables. There are plenty of literal things that he said, you know.
Right? Like it's like, yo, when he was like thirsty and needed some water, was he speaking in parables?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if he says
But
just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. I mean, I take that pretty literally.
yeah, I know. I just think you've run into the problem with Luke 24. I think that's like these people are like literally like they're not like dumb with when the math was. I mean that's not like a spiritual like understanding the water and the bread of life. It's just like, hey, like 3 days ago, this is the third day. Jesus constantly kept telling them on the third day. And I think that was something that was obvious in a sense that the third day. Now it's like, oh, but this is the third day since these things have happened.
But I think what they really meant is, we thought he was going to be the one to redeem Israel, and he said that in 3 days and 3 nights he would rise, and now we don't see him risen. It's 3 days since then, and this is why we're downcast.
Yeah, but then that would mean that they're wrong because it's 4 days since these things have happened. It's Sunday, it's not Saturday.
Right, but they could simply be saying it's past 3 days and 3 nights. I mean, otherwise they would still be expectant. But
it doesn't say. It says that and what's interesting is it's also Luke commentating on what happened. It says, if you go look at it again, it says in verse 13, it just so happens to say that that very day, so the same day, so it's the same day when Jesus resurrected. This is the third day. I just think it can't just because of Matthew chapter 12 verse 44. I think that's more symbolic than Luke chapter 24. It's much more plain, like because what does it really mean? 3 days and 3 nights. Like, is it? I mean, because it can't be 3 days and 3 nights. It has to be less than 3 days and 3 nights. Because if you go past 3 days,
We
and 3
know
nights,
the
you
way
get to the
it
fourth
counts
day.
too, because the Bible says today, tomorrow, and the third day, a couple places. So we know how it counts to 3.
so, Zach, where do you place the crucifixion, which day of the week and what time of day, and the resurrection?
Now he's on mute.
No, sorry, I'm just washing my knife. I definitely think it most likely was it for me. It could have been Thursday or Friday. I lean definitely more towards the Thursday account, but I just think that what's more clear is the day he resurrected, which was the first day of the week, according to Luke chapter 24. And then when you get into like, the Passovers and things like that, I mean, I believe that the biblical calendar is not what the Jewish people were keeping in the first century and till even today. They don't, that's why when you like want to start following the biblical feast days and things like that, how people do, it's like, well, the first thing that happens is, yeah, you got to keep the feast. All right, well, when is it? Well, that depends on who you ask, because there's many different interpretations on how things are calculated. And
I
I
think that
think,
was meant to be.
well, I think what happened is the Masoretic text for the first and foremost part is where the most misunderstanding is. Um, they follow a moon calendar. I think that came from Babylon. That's not what God intended. The moon has nothing to do with the calendar, but that's what the Jews follow. So, and again, Jesus rebuked them for their traditions of men that they held above, and it definitely seems that Jesus kept the Passover meal. Luke chapter 20, not 21, what is it? 19 or something like that. In the Gospel of Luke, wherever the Last Supper meal is, he says, like, I've longed to eat this like, go prepare the Passover, and then he's eating the Passover, and he says, I've longed to eat this Passover with you. Like, they're eating the Passover, but then the next, like, literally that night, he gets arrested, and then the next day, Pilate is like, okay, according to the tradition, I release one, prisoner for your feast day. And then in John, it says that feast was Passover. And then the Jews, when they were arresting Jesus and everything, they didn't want to go into Caiaphas's or into Pilate's, like, whatever, so that they wouldn't be defiled. So for them, they didn't keep the Passover yet. But for Jesus, because he was keeping the right Passover, because he was fulfilling, everything that, he fulfills and eats the Passover perfectly.
How was Christ keeping the right Passover in your mind, though? I don't get that.
Because there's different calendars.
Yeah, even with different calendars, I don't get it.
Because if there's two different calendars, you would start your New Year's different than I would start mine.
Which day did Christ have the Passover then?
Well, to him, it was the 14th.
Okay. So what day was he crucified?
It could have been. Are you talking about the day of the week or the day of the calendar?
The month.
Oh, it was the first month on depending on his calendar, the 15th.
Okay, so he was crucified on the 15th on his calendar.
Yeah, because he kept the Passover already, which was the 14th, and then that night he gets arrested. The next day, it's the 15th. And
is the 15th the true calendar then?
Of the Passover?
Right, like according to like.
No, Passover was the day before.
So Christ kept the wrong calendar?
No, there's two different calendars going on. You have
right. I'm saying which one did Christ do? Not
Christ kept the one that again, like, if you look at it, Jesus kept the Passover. The Last Supper was the 14th day of the month. Jesus was keeping the Passover. So, but to the Jewish people, to the nation,
I don't even bring up the Jewish people. I just want to know what Christ did. I want to see if Christ did right.
Christ kept the true calendar of God. So when he was eating the Passover, it was the 14th day of the first month.
But wait, Zach, yeah. Wouldn't that mean that Jesus was not crucified on the biblical Passover then?
No, he kept the Passover. He is our Passover lamb.
Right, but you just said that he kept the Passover on the Last Supper.
Yeah.
So how can that
That's
be?
What I'm saying. I think you got a contradiction going on.
Absolutely.
No, okay, again, you have, according to the book of Hebrews, that Jesus is the atonement, which he did not die on Yom Kippur. So you don't have to have Jesus die on the specific day to fulfill a specific feast day.
Well, why wouldn't you, though?
So here on the,
that's pretty significant.
I got this chart up, Zach. Can you see my chart? I'll move the things to the way you want it, and then we'll just see.
Yeah.
So you say that he ate on the 14th because you got day starting at I think daylight, right?
Yeah, I think in the daylight that was the.
So I got it daylight. So they ate the 14th. He had the Passover here on the 14th night, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he was crucified on the 15th.
Yeah.
So how do you have him being the Passover lamb on the 14th too? Because you have him over here.
I don't think Jesus has to die on the 14th to be the Passover lamb. He was already the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world in John chapter 1.
Could the Passover have started? Wouldn't it have been a day, a whole day? So
well, the Passover is just a preparation. It's just a meal which goes into the 15th. So again, when you look at especially like where I'm coming from, like from the Hebrew roots, I know the calendar very well. I mean, but
the calendar. Listen to the point Rob made about when they were in Egypt. Explain that to him.
Yeah, I'll go.
Yeah, that was the 14th.
Again. But Zach, you took your contradiction away there. I think you didn't realize you contradicted yourself for a moment.
Okay, can you please explain?
You had him being crucified on the 14th, and is that what you want me to explain, or what Lori was saying?
I don't believe Jesus died on the 14th.
Yeah, you said he did there for a moment. I don't think you meant to do that. So,
so if I did that, so I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I think I said he doesn't have to die, which I said he doesn't have to die on the 14th to be the Passover lamb.
Yeah,
but to the Jews,
for a moment there, you said the 14th was the
I'm sorry. Please
so
forgive me.
that's all right. No big deal.
But
So
you
we
were
had
right,
the
man, anyways.
Passover. They had the Passover dinner on the 14th, and the evening of the
Yes.
14th.
Correct.
Crucified
On the 15th.
on the 15th in the afternoon, right?
Yeah. Yes. And buried on the 15th. While the Jews were keeping the Passover, which to them was the 14th day of the month.
So you have Jesus being crucified on the biblical day of unleavened bread, which is a high Sabbath.
Yeah.
So they buried him on a high Sabbath.
Yeah, but again,
why
the
but why
people
would
that
they-
but hold on, the people that buried him were keeping the Passover, which was the 14th day. Again, like I think the biggest thing.
John says they had to bury him because the high Sabbath was approaching.
Well, it says the Sabbath.
It says a high day.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
No, I think you're confused again on that, Matthew, because
Well, why
it's-
would they say the high day?
if you read that scripture, let's look at it. I think it's John 19:31. There's two different ways to look at it. Let's see. The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation, that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was a high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So you could look at it that it's saying that day was the high Sabbath.
Already the high Sabbath, right? I don't think that's what it's saying.
I mean, what I've done
Well,
is
let
because
me finish. You didn't even give me a chance to present two views before you cut me off, Matthew.
Go ahead.
So you could look at it one way, that they thought that that was the high day
Mhm.
and the high Sabbath day, or you could look at it saying that they couldn't remain on the cross on the Sabbath day.
That's approaching, right?
Right. So there's two, and then the Sabbath day. So you could do it different ways, and that day was a high day. So there's actually kind of three different ways to look at it.
Right, but we already, if you put that together with the biblical mandate to rest and eat the Sabbath on the first day of unleavened bread, which is a high day, then you have to come to the conclusion that
The first day isn't a high day. The first day is the 14th.
What? No, you didn't let me finish. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you maybe, because earlier you didn't say that. You kind of went back on what you were saying earlier. The first day of unleavened bread isn't a high day. It's the feast day, right? Or are you changing? Because it's the 15th is the day that you don't do any work. The 14th, you're doing all the work.
Right. What I've always said is that the 14th, in my mind, was the preparation day, which is the Passover, in which you're allowed to work, and that's where you slay the lamb. The 15th day is the day that you eat the lamb, you recline, and you're not allowed to do any work. That's the first day of unleavened bread.
No, so that's not. I guess you're saying why are you calling that the first day?
Because unleavened bread is a specific day, according to Leviticus 23. That's on the 15th, and it's the day after the Passover. Whether the Jews changed the calendar or not, that's what God told them to do. So I would think if Jesus is going to fulfill Scripture, he's going to disregard whatever the Jews changed and do it on the proper day. And that's why I believe he was crucified on the Passover, and then he was in the tomb as the bread that would not see decay, the unleavened bread on the day of unleavened bread. That was the first day of his burial.
So if I could just interject one thing with that. So did Jesus eat the Passover lamb?
No. They didn't
Well,
even
it doesn't make a difference if he did or not, because the first day of unleavened bread, we talked about this earlier, Matthew. The first day of unleavened bread is when they prepared it,
No, I think that's wrong, Rob.
No, that's wrong. They began to call the whole holiday either the Passover or unleavened bread. So you got to be careful. They called it unleavened bread, even though they started it at the Passover. They were calling it the wrong thing.
So explain Matthew 14:12 to me then, because I'm not catching on.
Mark 14:12?
Yeah.
Matthew or Mark?
Mark.
Because they began to call the whole They lumped everything together, and
They called the whole week the first day of unleavened bread.
yeah, they
Yeah,
called the whole thing.
verse 1, and after 2 days was the Passover of unleavened bread. Like if you go in the Old Testament, it's never like
Yeah,
says
but
that
the
way.
first day,
Well, the
Mark
Passover is
12.
before. Well, if you look at Leviticus chapter 23, it actually is a pretty specific. It says on the 15th day and the 21st day there shall be no work.
Right.
So the 14th day is the day of where the lamb was killed. So you obviously were getting things ready.
You're preparing. That's a preparation day,
Yeah.
and you're working.
And you're eating that lamb at night on the 14th day.
Right, but if night brings on the next day,
Yeah,
then
then it would be the
technically
15th they actually ate.
right on unleavened bread.
Yeah.
So again, before explain Mark 14 to me, then.
Verse
Well,
12, you were saying?
Yeah.
it seems like they're calling the day of Passover unleavened bread, because that, I believe, was their custom at the time to do so.
Yeah, agreed. That's why I always thought that
But
there was
that's
a
the
problem.
14th, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the
But it's
14th.
not unleavened bread yet. When you go back to the Old Testament, unleavened bread was not the 14th day.
Right.
The unleavened bread starts on the 15th and goes to the 21st day of the month. And that's found in Leviticus chapter 23. Let's see here. Yeah, so it says, and you should put a food offering of 2. Yeah, so it says, hold on. Or maybe it's in
Yeah, it's
Exodus.
Leviticus 23, the first few verses.
It says the 15th and the 21st?
You're talking about where it says like at the 21st. I don't know if that's Leviticus.
In the
Maybe
14th day of
Deuteronomy.
the month, first month at even is the Lord's Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of the unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread.
Mm-hmm.
In the first day ye shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein.
That's the high Sabbath.
The first day is?
The first day of unleavened bread is the day after the Passover, and that day is the high Sabbath. It doesn't matter. High Sabbath is a yearly Sabbath. It doesn't matter if it ends up on Saturday or not.
Right.
It's a
Okay,
high
so
day.
hold on. Okay, I found it. It's Exodus chapter 12, verse 17 and 18.
Exodus what?
12. This is where it actually mentions the specific day of the month. So and it says, and you shall observe unleavened bread. On this very day I brought you out of your armies from the land of Egypt, that you shall observe this day for your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of unleavened bread. So if you keep reading, it says in verse 19, for 7 days no leaven shall be found in your house. For anyone eating any leaven, that shall. So it just shows you for 7 days. But if you do the 14th to the 21st, that's not 7 days.
If you do what? Sorry.
If you count out, like if you put on a calendar and you like count how many specific days there is, it doesn't work. If you just like draw out a calendar and start from the 14th and go, okay, 14th is the first day,
It's up on
second,
my
third,
screen if you
fourth,
want to
fifth,
look
sixth,
back
seventh,
the
eighth.
way you have it.
Yeah, so the 21st would be the 8th day, but the Bible says it's for 7 days, so it's the 15th day that you start it.
Yeah, okay. That would be the high day. So you think Christ was crucified? You've got him here on Friday day.
Well, then you have Christ on the 14th, though. Keep it on the 14th, not the 15th, Zach.
Yeah, again, I believe Jesus ate the Passover on the 14th. I don't see how you can get around when it talks about in Luke.
Well, how do you have the original Passover then?
What do you mean? Like in Exodus chapter 12?
Yeah,
Yeah, they ate the Passover lamb on the 14th day.
right. But you were saying that the 1 day count starts on the 15th.
Okay.
And then you were saying that they stop before the 21st or after the 21st?
Yeah, it goes the 21st of the month is the last day of unleavened bread.
Okay, so you have it like...
Yeah, so the seventh day is the 21st. So
Okay.
they eat the Passover lamb on the 14th day. And I believe Jesus ate the Passover on the 14th day. Again, the Last Supper, in my mind, is the Passover.
Right.
While everybody else was not keeping the Passover. This is why, there was things happening. This is why that they didn't want to go inside of, I guess, Pilate's.
Would you say the unfaithful fig tree?
Yeah, like Jews. Like, again, like we don't realize. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys. I mean, I know Rob kept the feast days and things like that, but I mean, I tried to apply it as best as I can. And when you come into the Hebrew roots, like the main focus is that's one of the biggest differences between, Christianity and Hebrew roots is that we're trying to understand the calendar. And so, every year we're just constantly trying to understand it. And when I would come to the New Testament, this is when I believe the New Testament was false in a sense, because you do have Matthew, Mark, and Luke saying Jesus died, and then John. There's a difference. So it's which is correct. And what I believe is correct is that there's two different calendars going on. Jesus constantly was saying, okay, go to the feast day for Sukkot, and I'm not going to go now. I'm going to come later. And he comes later. And there's a couple other places. I was a lot more
Because you think he didn't go later because you think that he was
There's a
following his
different
own calendar?
Yeah, there's a different calendar going on.
Like God's calendar?
Yeah, according to the Bible, that the Jewish people, they had made up a calendar when they came out of Babylon. They had brought traditions from 70 years of Babylon. They started naming the months. They started following the moon. And this is what they do even to this day. I mean, they follow a lunar calendar. But when you look at the scriptures, the Masoretic text kind of points to that and says, yes, that is the calendar. But when you look at the Septuagint, that's when you go, actually, wait a second. No, the calendar is not a lunar calendar. Even within the Masoretic text, you can look at Genesis chapter 7 that talks about a 5-month period with the Noah's flood from the second month, the 17th day of the month, all the way to the 7th month, 17th day of the month. It was 5 months, 150 days. That's 30-day months each month. So the biblical calendar is not a lunar calendar, because a lunar calendar would put you at about 28 or 29 days each month, which wouldn't be correct. And then you look at Revelation, and it talks about 42 months, 1,260 days, and again, that's using 30-day month calendars. So I think the true biblical calendar is a 30-day month calendar, and it gets reset at the equinox. But according to Jews and their customs was to follow the moon and then look for Abib, and then because each year their calendar gets reset or kind of falls back, they have to reset it by adding a 13th month. And they do that even to this day.
There's an example in in Acts 12 where the writer calls the days of unleavened bread the Passover. In Acts 12, 3 and 4. of course, the King James mistranslates it and puts the word Easter in there, but it's really
No, that's
Pesach.
divine. Yeah, definitely.
Say that again, Matthew.
In
Easter
that-
what?
In the King James, Acts 12:4 uses the word Easter,
Hmm.
but there is no Easter. That's taken from pagan god Ishtar.
Yeah.
The word is Pesach, which is Passover. So it should be translated Passover. But the point is that it says because let's see, it calls the days of unleavened bread in verse 3 the Passover in verse 4. So they were calling like the whole period of time that was 7 days
Passover.
the Passover.
Yeah, you can even look today. Go talk to a Jewish person and ask him how many days is Passover. You know what he'll tell you? He'll tell you 8 days long.
Right.
And again, we can see that tradition all the way back in the first century. It's just, and that was what I had to come to realize too, because Matthew, I was so confused. I remember when I was dating my wife at the time, and I was telling her how the New Testament was in error because of this, because I was saying, oh well, according to the Old Testament, you know, this is how you would say it, but in the New Testament, you have these Greek pagans writing the Bible, not knowing anything about what the scriptures talk about, but not realizing that the custom of that time period had just called the whole week Passover.
Right. And it wouldn't be a stretch to say that they would call the day of Passover unleavened bread, like in Mark, where were we? Mark 12?
12, yeah. And technically, you do eat unleavened bread on the 14th day.
Right. You do eat matzah, correct.
Yeah. I mean, because even in my book, it's still that night that they're eating, it's still the 14th day.
But now,
regardless.
isn't it possible? Let's imagine for a moment that Jesus really did die on the Passover, the biblical Passover that God had told him to observe for 1,500 years. So but then he tells the apostles, I've eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you. Let's say that he's speaking metaphorically, like to eat the Passover is actually for him to give his life. And that's why he says at the supper, which I believe is the day before the Passover, that this is my blood and this is my body. Because now he's referring to what's about to take place at the cross. I don't see them gathering a lamb because they don't need to eat a lamb.
Well, Jesus is the lamb.
Jesus is the lamb. So if he was really celebrating the Passover with the disciples, they would have gathered a lamb.
Yeah, no, they did. It was Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jesus
So
is,
I think the problem is, can you go to Luke and I guess explain how you, because when I came to Luke, I was
What part of
very
Luke?
confused. Luke, starting in verse 11.
Luke what?
what chapter?
Sorry. Chapter
I
22.
was 13, but okay, 11.
22.
What chapter?
22 verse 11.
No, 11:22 or 22:11?
22,
No, it's
11?
22:11. I just
Okay.
said 11. I said I'm sorry.
Okay, 22:11.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. It's
No,
certainly,
but no, like,
it's,
so
it
the way I
sounds
read
like
it,
he's
but now
going.
now listen,
Let him,
I'm gonna
yeah.
just read it. So it says, and you will say to the housemaster of that house, our master says to you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And that one will show you a large upper room which he has furnished. Prepare there. And having gone, they found as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover.
Mhm.
And when the hour came, he reclined with the 12 apostles with him. And he said to them, I have greatly desired that I eat this Passover with you before I suffer. So he's just said, like, I don't know how you can take it. I mean, it literally says, prepare the Passover. They went, they prepared the Passover, and as the hour came, well, what hour? The Passover came. They sat down, and he said to them, I have greatly desired that I may eat this Passover with you before I suffer.
Mhm.
So it's definitely he's definitely eating the Passover. It's like clear. I mean, I know you like all the very clear passages and things like that. I mean,
But
I don't know how much clearer you can
do you
get.
think at that same time? No, and I get it, and that definitely sounds like he's eating the Passover that day. But again, Jesus is the Passover, so they didn't gather a lamb. But do
Yeah,
you
but he
think
is the
all the
lamb.
lambs like were the lambs being killed, or is that where you come in and say, well, they're following a different calendar? So
Yeah, the Jewish people are keeping, because if you keep reading and you look at John and all these things when the arrest happens, it's literally the next, like, so when he gets arrested and then that morning, that's when the Jewish people are keeping Passover.
and that's why John calls that the Passover in your mind.
Yeah, there again, to the Jewish people it literally was Passover. They were literally doing all these things. Even Pilate was releasing prisoners as a custom was on the Passover.
Yeah, I mean, I see the difference like you do between the synoptics and John, and that's was greatly confusing me. And so what I did when I went on a quest to find out what day Jesus was killed and resurrected, I decided to follow John, which could be a huge mistake, but John seems to be more clear in it. And I tend to look at John as the book where there are no parables, where it's talking to more like about the gospel, which is believe, believe, believe. There is no repenting in the book of John. The word repent never appears in the book of John. It's just like John is a different book. He talks about the world more and cosmos. For God so loved the world. All these things are in John. It's like John is written to the world. So I decided I'm gonna focus on John and see and put the days together. And John specifically says that um, the Passover is the preparation day. The next day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the high Sabbath. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a discrepancy in here somewhere.
Yeah, the biggest thing is I don't know if you've ever actually like really looked at the differences within the calendars that even there's I mean great debate. I mean, I've spoken to, like, I have one friend that's like really Jewish, but he says he's a believer, but he's like super Jewish. His name is Katriel. And this guy is, I mean, he learned Hebrew. I mean, he has long sideburns. I mean, he's just, you know, super,
Yeah.
whatever. And he told me that he's read all the whatever, the Talmud and everything. He said that there is a big debate when the day starts. There's lots of sects that say it starts in the morning. Some start, but again, according to, because he believes that he's a Pharisee. He's literally a Pharisee Jew. And he believes that, because we have to obey the Sanhedrin, which would be like the Pharisees, that I follow this during, I believe that the day starts at night. So even within Judaism, there's great debates about the calendar, when days begin, when days start, how long, there's debates on when you keep first fruits. There's sects of Judaism that read Leviticus chapter 23, and they say it goes, we would say it would be that same week after the first Sabbath. Then, you would start counting. Well, they read it as you wait for the next weekly Sabbath to count. So when most Jews are keeping Pentecost, there's sects of Judaism that keep it a week later because they started 7 days later. So all I'm trying to say is that I believe most people, when they come to the Bible, they have no idea of the calendar, that how messed up it got through Judaism. And that's like a really big thing that, I mean, I believe that, like I said, most people have never really even looked
Yeah,
at.
yeah, no, yeah, I agree. Because, like, Adam, what kind of calendar did Adam have? That's right, he didn't have a calendar, right? It came after the fact. Probably after the flood, right? I mean, they might have had a calendar pre-flood, but how do you know?
Well, I mean, like the calendar I'm talking about is like from, like, Mosaic law, like from that period.
Right,
I
right,
don't know,
okay,
certain things
right,
like
right.
that.
So yeah, and based off of that calendar, yeah, like you have to go by that calendar now.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, I really do think that there's a huge difference in, and that's what really, that was one of the biggest things that got me out of the Hebrew roots as a whole, in a sense, because that was like one of the first times I ever really questioned even the Hebrew roots, because they're sitting there talking about, do you follow the new moon, which is the conjunction, or is the new moon the first sighting of the crescent moon? And and all these different things. And then I started looking at the Hebrew, and yes, in the Masoretic text, the word for moon and the word for month are interchangeable,
Hmm.
right? The
Zach,
word for moon, yeah.
I wanted to show you something on a couple of your different views. With the, can you see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the Thursday view. Let's just say it was Thursday. Then I'll show you Friday too.
Uh-huh.
And you know where it says they bought spices after the Sabbath?
Uh-huh.
So I have that. That's Mark 16:1 right here.
Uh-huh.
Can you see that?
Hmm.
So let's say after the Sabbath, they bought spices. And we're just going through these, So let's say they bought spices after the Sabbath. And then they were on the road to Emmaus, is it? On the third
Yeah.
day? So
Yeah,
if
on
it
the
was
third day.
Thursday, then it would be the fourth day. So just something to think about. Now I wanted to show you the Friday view.
I don't know what do you mean?
You know how you were arguing that it was the third day, that it was, because you said it could be Thursday or Friday. You could go either
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, with a Thursday view, they could buy the spices after the Sabbath, right? On after the Sabbath is over,
Okay.
because this is the Sabbath would be from daylight to night, right?
On Saturday?
Well, let's see. The Sabbath would be, when would you have the Sabbath then, Zach? I guess you would have the Sabbath, what, over here?
I don't know. I never really considered it with the spices and all that stuff before. Never
Yeah,
even.
because I think you're going to have a little bit of issue. But let's see. The Sabbath would be, if the day starts with
Yeah,
light, when is the Sabbath? Is it Friday to Saturday, or is it
it would be the seventh.
Saturday to Sunday?
Yeah, it would be whenever the seventh day is, which would Saturday. But when does Saturday start is the question.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it
Saturday
starts in
for
the.
us starts at midnight, so
Yeah, I
you would
believe
have,
it's in the morning.
right, but you have the Sabbath. So you have the Sabbath going from Saturday to
Sunday.
Sunday. Okay, so
Yeah.
they would have to buy the spices when then after the Sabbath, right?
Which
Yeah, I don't know.
question?
Yeah.
Because if then they also rose, there wouldn't be time for them to buy the spices.
Stores weren't open yet.
Yeah, and I don't think that their stores were open at night neither. This is not like New York City where they
So I
go.
don't think that works with a daylight
I think y'all,
opportunity.
I think y'all should do the unfruitful fig tree parables, number 10.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is I mean, I definitely looked at this multiple times. I mean, me and you have went back and forth on this for ever since we've known each other. You make an argument for Friday. I just think the biggest thing is that he rose on Sunday.
Yeah, but even with Friday, that's what I wanted to show you. Let's say it's Friday. Okay,
Uh-huh.
this is the Friday crucifixion.
Uh-huh.
The Sabbath is still Saturday, right
Uh-huh.
here. When could they buy the spices again? It's going to be a problem. So I don't think it works for a daylight day.
Well, stores didn't open at night neither, by the way.
Well, I know, but when could they? I just don't. I don't see there.
I mean,
I don't see an opportunity.
I mean, where does it say? I mean, I
There's
have no
two
idea.
mentions of the spices. First, it says they bought the spices, but then they rested.
No, they
They
bought
wait.
the spices after the Sabbath.
Right, but you have to ask which Sabbath, because there's a high Sabbath and there's a weekly Sabbath.
Right, but let's say it's the high Sabbath.
Yeah, it had to be the high Sabbath. They couldn't have bought the spices after the weekly Sabbath because they would have had no time.
Right,
So,
but think about that, Matthew. Even with Zach's view, they couldn't buy on the high Sabbath, right?
right, they have to buy after the high Sabbath is over.
Yeah, and so then they can't buy on the Sabbath either, so they still can't buy the spices.
Here's what
There's no time to buy the spices with Zach's view on a day if the day starts with light.
right.
So the only way it works is if he was crucified on.
Well, it has to start at night, and then the views vary. But for the day to start with daylight, it can't work, no matter what your view.
I think the biggest thing is when you go to the Old Testament, you look, when does the day start? There's
Yeah,
so
but
many
when would they
passages.
buy the spices?
It could have been in the
They had
morning
to buy the spices on Friday.
after the Sabbath.
Let's say that
It could have been Friday then. That's
okay,
fine.
that's what I say. I say it's
Yeah.
Friday. If Jesus was crucified on Wednesday and Thursday was the high Sabbath of unleavened bread, then it says that after the Sabbath they bought spices. So that would be Friday.
Yeah, but Zach says they can't be crucified on Wednesday, so he has no time to buy the spices.
No, it's Thursday. So Thursday's the Sabbath in that sense, because in my view, it's the 15th or it's the 14th. So it could have been. I mean, I don't know. So what do you think? Let me hear your view.
It also says that
Because there's problems with every view. I don't think nobody has the truth on it, or like.
it also
Perfect.
says regarding those spices that after they prepared the spices, then they rested, and then they went to the tomb.
Can we
So,
see that verse? Where's that?
I don't know where it is. I was looking for my chart because I made a chart too, and I can't find it.
Type it into Google exactly what he just said. Like you'll find it.
Yeah, we'll find the verse because there are two verses that you have to put together. One you already mentioned in Mark. What was it? 16:1, where it says they bought the spices after the Sabbath. Where was that verse?
Where they bought the spices, that's let me go back here. They bought the spices 16:1.
Okay, 16:1. If we can find the other verse that I'm talking about, because I don't remember where it is. I'm looking now, where they
Oh no, here it is. I just found it. Luke chapter 23, verse 56. And
that's
it
got to
says,
be it.
and returning, they prepared spices and perfume, and indeed they rested on the
And they
Sabbath
rested.
according to the commandment.
So focus on those two verses for a minute, and you're going to see that there is a whole day between buying the spices and then preparing them. Because let's say they buy the spices after the high Sabbath, which let's say is a Friday. Then they prepare the spices on the Friday that they're allowed to work. But now they can't bring it to the body because it's now the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath. So they have to wait and they have to rest. So that gives you the 3 days and the 3 nights in my scenario.
Yeah, I think actually, like just thinking about it, I'm like every view works, but there's like scriptures where we would have to be like, okay, well, obviously,
Throw that one out.
yeah, exactly. Because I see exactly what you're saying, and I used to believe the exact same thing until I saw the Luke 24. But if I just threw the Luke 24 thing out, then yeah, that works perfectly.
So throw the Luke 24 out.
When
Nah,
do
I
you
think
when
that's
do you
too
have
good.
Luke 23:56, Matthew?
Then they returned and prepared spices, fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath. So this Sabbath has to be different than the one in which they before they bought the spices. So these two verses together tell people that there are two Sabbaths in the Passion Week. A lot of people don't even realize that. To begin,
Right. What day do you have the high day?
I put
The
the high day
14th or
on
the 15th?
Thursday.
So you have it on the 15th.
I placed the high Sabbath on Thursday the 15th. Then I say that they bought the spices on Friday after that Sabbath. Then I say that they rested on the weekly Sabbath, and then they brought it to Jesus on Sunday morning.
Which would be the fourth day.
Right, but he would have risen on the third day the night before.
But then Luke 24 disagrees with that, though. So you throw out Luke 24. And
But
then,
I don't read Luke 24 like that
It
verse.
doesn't say that he rose.
Well,
that day.
it actually says that all these things were the third day since
And
these
then you
things
also
happened.
have them saying, "Make ready the Passover on the 13th," though.
What'd you say? Say that again.
So with Matthew's view, they would be saying, "Make ready the Passover on the 13th," and then eating it on the 14th.
Yeah, well, for him, that wasn't Passover. So Jesus
to
didn't
me,
really say that it was the Passover.
To me, that
Yeah,
really
but you
wasn't.
can't say like, "Okay, these are God's words." It wasn't really the Passover, even though God said it was.
I mean, I agree with that statement right
Fill that
there.
one out too.
So yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like Rob, like each of us has to, in a sense, like throw something out to make something else fit.
I don't think you have to throw anything out with the view I have.
So it seems like you got it perfect. So let's hear it.
All right. The only thing the one thing that Matthew brought up is the argument that they couldn't bury him on the 15th. If you want to throw that in there, then I got nothing.
It's okay. You throw that one. See, look, we all throw something out.
How dare you with that?
But here's the biggest thing: Jesus died and he resurrected. Hallelujah.
That's it.
That's really.
I said
So
that.
we're right back to where we
Well.
started from an hour and a half ago.
Yeah. So anyway,
Oh, jeez.
I do have all the rest. I have them all lined up, all the next parables.
Do
But
we
I
drive
mean,
you crazy, Albert?
probably we
I
do.
mean-
I am crazy. I'm sorry.
Who can talk about the resurrection, do a complete circle, and still come back to where you were?
He has a notebook
I know.
written down. He just
It's
has
a
it.
conspiracy.
But on a serious note, I gotta go to bed. But don't do the parables, the good ones. You guys know what I'm talking about, Matthew.
Which ones are those? Not.
We're doing
Can we
those
talk about
tonight.
the ones that
Zach.
have to do with seeds?
What the
Does that mean there's bad parables, Zach?
Well, I mean the ones that I really wanted to go over. The
Which ones?
Matthew knows, which the 16, 15, 16 or whatever, and Luke.
15, 16, yeah.
Yeah, let's do that on Friday. Okay, it's a date.
Okay, fine. Write it
All
in
right.
your copy book.
All right, perfect. I'm gonna go to bed. Much love, everybody. I'm gonna listen to this when I'm at work tomorrow. So I'll talk to you guys later.
Sounds good. We'll talk about much fun things without you. That was good. He signed off with the. That's classic Zach. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. You guys were having such fun talking about all these things. I guess that means we can't actually like. I don't even. Stacy didn't even show up tonight.
Yeah, what's
Missing
going on with
people.
him?
I hope he's all right.
We're missing
not like-
people.
That's not like him not to show up.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I was hoping to tell you about the next one. Because the next one in the series was the unfruitful fig tree.
Oh, that's Israel. Go to the next one.
Oh, the next one after that was the the one that we were actually trying to get was the sower of the 4 types of soil.
Okay, just wait. I have a question about the fig tree one. There's 2 different things on the fig tree, isn't there? A positive and a negative, right? Am I right?
What do you mean by 2 different things on a fig tree?
Kind
Positive.
of opposite.
I mean, I have fig trees in my backyard. What do you mean by that? Because
There
none
was
of them would
one
give
in
me
the
any.
Bible, Albert, not yours.
But I know it's a metaphor. But like, what do you mean?
Isn't there 2 accounts of the fig trees in the word? No.
It's mentioned quite a bit here.
Oh shoot! I just about dropped it. Oh. Let me see. Hang on here.
Yeah, the fig tree is definitely mentioned a lot, but like it's don't focus too much on the fig because the fig actually in some of the things Jesus said, like fig don't work out too well. Like it winds up getting kind of screwed over a little bit.
No, I know that. I'm just talking about there was a difference. Where is it? Because he curses the fig tree, and then
I don't know if there's a positive light on the fig tree unless it's just like a, I don't know, benign.
Okay, so what does this one mean? Now learn a parable of a fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh.
I can tell you exactly what that means. I mean, like, I have a fig tree in my backyard, and I can tell you
No, I don't.
that is a true. No, that's a true statement. When I go into my backyard, I can actually see that like summer is very close to being the season that is actually upon us, because the fig tree does exactly what he said. But in like manner, right? He said, just so you can see, as the fig tree does this, right? He's letting you know, like, these things that I'm talking to you about right now, like, they're going to happen very, very soon. Like, just as you see in summertime, these things happen, right? It's the same difference. So that's all he's trying to
No.
tell you. He's like, if you can observe these things, you can observe what's going to happen real soon, right?
Right.
Yeah. So in other words, he's just using fig tree there to make an analogy. Like the
Yes.
fig tree.
So this is in reference to 70 AD then, is
Yes.
what I'm getting at. Thank you.
100%. 100%.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, but
Yes, of course.
the fig tree here isn't symbolic of anything. He's just he's just saying, just like when you see the fig tree, blooming, summer is near. Just like that, when you see these signs, know that my coming is near.
Right. But he's using
Exactly.
it as an analogy.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But then he tells a parable of certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came to seek fruit on it. I mean, now the fig tree is definitely representative of Israel. There's no doubt.
Right. That's the one that we were supposed to read just now. I mean, we can do that one if you want, because you just read it. So, like, let me read it. Let me just read it. Right.
Luke 13.
Is it 13?
Luke 13:6.
Okay. Okay, Luke 13:6. But you don't you think we should read like just a little bit beforehand? All right.
Well,
Wait.
yeah. I mean, if you read before it, you're just going to see Jesus reprimanding the Pharisees. That's the context.
Okay, fair enough. Schnikes. 13. No, I'm in the wrong spot. I gotta go to Luke. I was in Acts. That's definitely different. All right, 13:6. All right, so yeah, no, you should definitely read for. All right, so reading from the beginning, it says "repent or perish" is where it starts for Luke 13, the beginning of Luke 13. Now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Jesus answered, "Do you think that these Galileans were worse than sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. Or those 18 who died when the Tower of Siloam fell, do you think that they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will perish." And then here we go, 6. This is the 13:6. Then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it. Sounds like me. But he didn't find any. Yeah, I didn't find any either. So he went to the man who took care of the vineyard, and he said, "For 3 years now I have been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and have not found any. Cut it down, I say." Right? I say cut it down. Uh, why should it use up the soil? And then he said, right, "Sir," the man replied, "leave it alone for one more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit 1 year, fine. If not, I'll cut it down. So what do you think that means? Because that's kind of the same
I
thing
often
I would
wonder
have.
what Bible you're reading, Albert.
It's the NIV. It's the non-inspired version. You should probably not read that version. But just so we're clear here. But anyway, it's basically the same thing that I would do. It's like, like, all right, I know you want to cut down this tree because it ain't giving you no fruit. Like, I have a tree like that in my backyard. It's called the kiwi fruit. The kiwi fruit in my backyard, 7 years now, it hasn't given me no fruit. I'm about to cut that John down, but like at the same time, someone's telling me like let it go one more, right? Like you tell me what's happening. I just read the verse. The whole point of the whole thing was like let it go for like one more season. Like that's what I got out of it.
I was going to ask a
That's
question,
the first parable of the
but I cannot remember what
with
it
the
was
seeds.
now. Oh,
No, it was the
Matthew.
seeds. Like
With the dispensationalists, they use that as an example of Israel.
Yeah,
And
but selectively they do.
yeah,
What they say is that, the fig tree is Israel.
Yeah.
And when you see Israel,
come back to
when you
life.
see the
Yeah,
fig
yeah.
tree budding,
47,
generation
1947,
will
48.
see the coming of the Lord.
So 47 and 48, right?
Right, but they're
Gotcha.
they're past due.
Yeah.
They're way past due.
But wasn't it supposed to happen to that generation? So they've made it now, extended it. What? It's how many years?
They keep making a generation longer and longer.
I even heard one guy say it's probably 120. So
only 120, huh?
What?
Span of a person.
Yeah.
First was 40, then 70. Now it's going to be 120.
Yeah. Yeah, he upped it to 120. Okay. That's the only questions I had.
Really? That's the only question you had for now.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to it.
So, sower of seeds on four types of soil. That's the next one. We're gonna conquer that.
Cool. Which one is where is this one located?
Oh, sorry. This is located in multiple places all over the place. This is apparently Matthew 13, 3 through 8 and 18 through 23. Mark 4, 3 through 8 and 14 through 20, and then also Luke 8, 5 through 8 and 11 through 15. Somehow, some way are related to this 4 different types of soil with the sower.
So Matthew 13, 3 what?
3 through 8, Matthew 13, 3 through 8 is the first part. And then 18 through 23 is a different part.
Oh, I must be in the wrong place here. You said Matthew 3, 3 through 8?
No, Matthew 13.
Oh, it's close.
Matthew 13, 3 through 8.
Okay. Makes more sense.
Yeah, it's a little bit into the book a little bit, but it's 4 types of soil, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense to me. I mean, I'm a gardener and all, so it makes sense to me. Like, I be throwing seeds all over the place, and I'm like, wow, it is true. Like, some of these seeds do sprouting, but some of these seeds they don't be sprouting. It all depends on where they land. I mean, what's going on here? You tell me.
So I can read this one if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew 13, 1. On the same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea, and great multitudes were gathered together to him, so that he got into a boat and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. Then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow, and he sowed some seed, and as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, It was scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So first thing I want to say is the last verse there kind of gives this away if you know why Jesus keeps saying all the time, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Because he will go on, Matthew will actually comment. No, it's Jesus. Because they ask him, why do you speak in parables? The disciples do. So he then quotes Isaiah 6, which is the all-important context-setting chapter of all of Jesus's ministry. It's where God tells Isaiah to speak to Israel and put them under a spirit of stupor and give them, a blindness.
So did this make them deaf too?
Yeah. So basically, this tells you that parable is not about the church age, which is what most Christians. Wow, that was a fast car.
As a
That
motorbike,
was a very fast car.
it's a
So
crotch rocket.
this parable, in my mind, is speaking about the physical ministry of Jesus, and as he's preaching, the ones who have the ears to hear, which are the ones that God has opened their eyes at that point, which are the apostles. They hear, they see, they believe Jesus is the Christ. The rest of them are all depicted in the different, the different people who reject.
So is that the remnant?
Well, I say that the apostles and those who got saved during the 40 years were the remnant of Israel. And if God didn't have a remnant, they would have become like Sodom and Gomorrah. That's a reference to 70 AD. So God.
Oh, gotcha. Right. Okay. That, you know what? I used to wonder what that meant.
So Paul, that's why Paul quotes from Isaiah. Though the descendants of Israel had become like the sand of the sea, only a remnant will be saved.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if God hadn't left a remnant, they would have become like Sodom and Gomorrah. So in other words, 70 AD would have destroyed them all.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's really...
That's why Paul can say in Romans that God hasn't cast away his people.
Yeah, but you know
there's a remnant.
You know what's really fun about that thing you just mentioned about like the whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing?
Yeah.
Right? Who was Abraham, right? The promise was made to Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham. Right? Well, in that case, who the heck in relation is Lot? Righteous Lot, right? Righteous Lot, he escapes somehow. He's not given the promise, but somehow, because of like relation or whatever. You see what I'm saying? Like, why righteous
Is he
Lot?
like the younger brother?
How did he escape? He was supposed to escape the fire.
Mm-hmm.
But his wife didn't.
Well, his wife didn't because she looked back. But I'm mainly asking Matthew, like, what do you think about that? Because isn't it the same thing you're talking about? It's the same, isn't it? It's exactly what you're saying.
He's Lot is his nephew, but those who are in Abraham's bosom,
right, but he wasn't right. My point in being with this whole thing is that he was not descended from Abraham. So he's a different guy, but nonetheless, God was looking out for him, was he not?
And who does he represent?
Gentiles, I don't know.
He could
maybe Gentiles.
represent the remnant of Israel who escaped 70 AD by listening to the word of Jesus and fleeing.
It could be that too. I'm just saying, there's lots of stuff that happens in the Bible. Like, Amorites actually fought on the side of Abraham to rescue Lot, stuff like this. So, like, these Gentiles, pagan nations, some of the things that they actually wound up fighting against, you know, they were actually their friends once upon a time.
But if you look at this parable here, and you read it in light of Jesus' ministry, you have so many Jews that are believing him. They're coming to him. They're asking for this one to be healed in their family, and this one to be raised from the dead. And then at the cross, they're all shouting, "Crucify him!" So this parable is speaking about Israel during the time of Jesus' ministry. But a lot of Christians put this like in the time frame of the last 2,000 years, which it is true that people reject Jesus, but specifically, I think it was talking about that.
That's what you think this one's about? I mean, about the one where like I come to the vineyard and there's no fruit?
Well, that's different. I mean, that's Jesus looking for fruit. That's like Isaiah 1 begins like that. Or Isaiah 5 talking about the vineyard where God, wanted fruit. Amos talks about a basket of fruit and it's not producing any good fruit. It's Israel. That's who God expected fruit from. He didn't get any, so he destroys it.
But wasn't it the whole plan the whole time?
I suppose it was.
So you think this parable here that we're talking about right now is about the remnant?
It's about the fact that some of these Israelites that Jesus preaches to will believe him, but they'll fall away. Jesus said, "You'll all fall away, even you apostles."
Yeah, and it actually did. Peter.
Yeah, but you'll be restored. But the apostles were restored kind of miraculously because they were the chosen apostles for a purpose.
Do you think this also applies to today?
I think it's true for today, but I don't know if Jesus was speaking about
Specifically
today.
saying, yeah.
Like I said before, of course, people hear the gospel, some believe, some reject, some believe at first, and then they stop believing or they never. So, yeah, I guess you could apply it to today, but I don't think Jesus was talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that it has something to do with us today per se, but it's still relevant. Like what is said there can still be applied today.
Yeah, it says right in 15, for this people's heart is waxed gross and their ears are dull of hearing.
Well, that's Isaiah 6.
Yeah, so they weren't just blinded, right? They were definitely in a complete stupor.
But that's what, he's using the word blinded as. It means they're just not going to recognize Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But isn't that what all the healing is for? I mean, that's why there's so many blind people that he heals and deaf people's ears that he unstops.
Right.
Like that's how I've seen it.
But again, you have to remember today versus back then.
No, I'm talking about back then. I'm talking about that's
Right,
what it represented.
I would expect crazy-ish to go back down back then, but
What?
I wouldn't expect crazy-ish. I wouldn't expect crazy stuff to go down today, but I would back then. Like I'd be like, oh, he said some stuff. Like I seen this thing. Like, okay, back then, yes, I could see that happening, but today, like,
No, I'm
no.
talking about
I don't
then.
really see that happening anymore. Because, like, it's like, oh, with swords and, like, up to the horse's bridle. Like, come on. These are all, like, terms for, like, right? Like, aren't they're terms from, like, back in the day. Like, we don't have battles where, like, we have to determine, like, who's got more horses and stuff,
I'm totally
Like,
talking about back then, Albert. I'm saying,
but, like, okay.
so what I'm saying is that's what that isn't that why he did all the healing, was to show that people are blind and deaf and dumb, right? And I mean, didn't leprosy represent sin?
Okay.
know?
Okay. Maybe.
That's just what I
Yeah,
see
okay.
from it, I guess.
So you're saying, when he's saying like this dude was like a leper, it's not saying that he was actually got leprosy. He's just like being ridiculous.
Back then,
Yeah.
no, he had leprosy, but I see it as representing sin. I mean, leprosy started as a small spot,
Okay. Oh. Okay. So
and
it's what?
like sin starts small and it grows, right? The
Yeah,
more you maintain
definitely.
it, the more it
Yeah.
grows.
Right.
And so the same with him healing all the blind and the deaf. When he spits, no, when he applies the mud, no, what does he do? He spits into the mud. I can't remember. No, it
When
was
he's
a
spitting
two-step.
in
It
dude's
was a
face.
two-step process. It was a two-step process. He puts dirt on his eyes, and then he has to go and wash in the water, right? So everything represents something back then.
Depends on how you write it.
Okay, so what's next? Which one's next?
Oh, you want to know the next one after that? Oh dear. In order from there, you're talking about still 4 types of
Yeah.
soil, and then we have Mark. Instead of Matthew, well, we have Matthew 13, 3 to 8, and we have also 18 to 23 for some reason. But the next one is Mark 4, 3 to 8.
Well, let's go to Matthew 18. Would you say?
Matthew 18 to 23. I don't know why it has that, but that was just what was
Oh,
written on the list. But the next one is Mark 4, 3 to 8.
Because 13:8 is the explanation of the parable, where Jesus explains what that parable meant.
Right, but then aside from this, like it has 18 to 23 written for some
Right.
reason.
That's the
Oh,
explanation, even though it doesn't really explain much. When you read it, it's like, okay, it just said the same thing as what the parable says.
oh, wait, are you reading this differently than we are? Like, all right, so I'm imagining 18 to 23 means chapters 18 to 23, but you're saying no, 18 to 23, like 13, 8, like I
yes,
don't even know.
yes.
Yeah.
13,
Matthew
18 to
13,
23.
18 to 23 is the explanation of the parable of the sower.
Oh, snap.
Because they asked Jesus,
What's going on here?
what's going
Why
on?
parables?
No, okay, I'm just saying, like I just wrote down whatever was on the list
Yeah.
you linked. So like I was just, it says 18 to 23. Like it doesn't specify what 18 to 23. It could be chapter 18 or sentence
Well, this one
18.
makes sense. So when you go to number 21 here, it says, it talks about tribulation and persecution.
You have the list and you're on number 21?
No, I read 18. Hear ye the parable of the sower. When heareth the word of the kingdom and understand it not, then
Okay.
cometh the wicked one and catcheth away that which was sown in his heart. This is he which received seed by the wayside. But he that received the seed into stony places, the same as he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receive it. Yet hath he not root in himself, but dureth for a while. But when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, by and by he is offended. So it does kind of go hand in hand, Matthew.
Interesting.
Like it does talk about tribulation, persecution.
Mhm.
He also that received the seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. But he that receiveth the seed into good ground is he that heareth the word and understandeth it, which also beareth fruit, and bringeth forth, some at 100-fold, some at 60, some 30.
Yeah.
And then it goes on for the tares.
How many people, say to Jesus, let me go bury my father,
Yeah.
or let me go tend to the ox that I just bought. You know, that's what he's talking about.
Hmm.
But I want to know how many types of soil there are. Why are there only 4 types of soil here? Right? It's 4 types of soil. I
That
don't know. This one has the most. Like this right here is the one that has the most verses written down. It's got Matthew 2 different sections, and then Mark 2 different sections, and then Luke 2 different sections. 4 types of soil. I don't know. I'm pretty
Thorny,
sure that.
rocky. What other one is there?
Well, I mean,
Stony.
aside from what it says, I'm pretty sure there's really like two different kinds are good and 2 different kinds are pretty crap.
Good ground. Hmm. Okay, next one.
is the next one in order in Matthew here, or is chronological order different than the way they're listed in Matthew?
I don't know. The next one after that is weeds among good plans,
So that
and then
would
it
be
has
13.
kingdom of heaven in parentheses, and it's 13:24 through 30, and 36 through 43, and it looks like it's Mark or Matthew.
Yeah, see, I think the kingdom parables are slightly different than the other ones. The other ones kind of talk about Israel specifically. You know, the fig tree, who he curses, the city that gets destroyed. But the kingdom parables seem to be describing the new covenant. And the new covenant, you know, like the change from old to new. And that includes the destruction of Israel, but that's not all that there is. The kingdom describes what we've been living in for the last 2,000 years, in my mind. So, like when he talks about the mustard seed or leaven, that, you know, something that just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. You can't relegate that to AD 30 to 70, unless you're a full preterist.
Say that again, Matthew.
In other words, when he says like the mustard seed, the kingdom when he talks about the kingdom of heaven,
Hmm.
I take the kingdom of heaven as synonymous with the new covenant, which is what we've been living in for the last 2,000 years.
Hmm.
So it's not relegated like the fig tree parables are relegated to Israel, like this one that we just read with the 4 different kinds of soil. I think that was relegated to Israel. But the kingdom parables go beyond 70 AD. Even though some of them include the destruction of Israel or the change from Jew to Gentile as the people of God. Like when we get to Luke 15 and 16, you're going to see him talking about in code form that reversal or that switch that's going to take place. The kingdom of heaven parables are like that.
Right. And it's continually growing.
It keeps growing. You know,
And you said you can't really do that unless you're a full preterist?
well, yeah, because a full preterist wants to take everything that Jesus is saying and say it was all fulfilled in 70 AD.
Right? No, I see what you're saying there. So the kingdom, well, yeah, but how did the full preterist has to see that the kingdom continues to grow forever and ever?
I guess you can be a full preterist and see that the kingdom extends past 70 AD. Like Stacy might say that it's an everlasting kingdom. So he would see the kingdom going past 70 AD. But I think consistent, I don't think that's consistent. If you're going to be a full preterist and all prophecies fulfilled at 70 AD, then what we have is not spoken of and shouldn't be called a kingdom.
You mean because it was finished at 70 AD?
Because it was finished, you know. I mean, I could be wrong because I'm not a full preterist, so I can't speak for them.
Yeah.
But that's not the point of it. The point of it is that the
Well, I
kingdom,
think I heard maybe Stacy say like that it will continue to grow forever and ever and ever and ever.
yeah, he definitely believes that there'll be no end to it. It's an infinitely growing kingdom.
God's got to get bored. I could be wrong, but
If we got bored, we would all be doomed.
I mean to go infinite forever and eternity. And
I mean, even with all of that,
I
like,
mean, doesn't it say something? I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end.
he created it all. Like, you thought it was fun to play that game. Well, who do you think created it?
Fun to play what game?
Any game you can imagine. Doesn't matter. Just pick anyone. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm not getting it, Albert.
Okay, well, maybe a little bit of time.
Maybe.
Any game you can think of. And there you go. Like, there's nothing to get. Like, any game, anything you think of is possible. Right? You can do it.
So which one's next?
Yeah, because I'm going to get to bed soon. Let's do another one.
Oh, you want to do another one before you go to bed? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want the next one in the lineup of that line, or do you want the next one as in like the actual next one, which is weeds among God's plan? Well, weeds among
Why
plants.
don't we just finish Matthew 13? Although that's kind of long.
I mean, it's up to you because this actually has Matthew 13 in it. I think. It's
You mean
Matthew
this is in
13,
Matthew 13?
24. Let me see.
Albert, have you been
24,
drinking?
Matthew 20. No.
No? Okay.
No, of course I have been. I always drink.
Do
I
you?
like water and
I meant alcohol.
I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, if you haven't been able to tell, like most times, yeah, I have.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering.
Just just being honest.
No, I appreciate that.
Does it matter?
No, it doesn't matter to me.
I'm on point. Does it matter?
I want to
Sometimes your words draw out a long time. You just sound a little bit different.
Sorry. Well, flag me. Tell me that I'm flagged.
Can I bring something up that's not exactly a parable, but is definitely pertaining to this? So when in Matthew 13, 34, it says, all these things Jesus spoke to the multitude in parables, and without a parable he did not speak to them. Then it quotes Psalm 78. It says that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. And this is interesting because it calls the psalmist a prophet and says, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things kept secret from the foundation of the world. So that's Psalm 78. So I don't know if you've ever looked at Psalm 78, but it's a really interesting psalm. And
I like that one.
Matthew quotes it a little bit differently than it actually reads. But it says, a contemplation of Asaph. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he established the testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children. Now, I think this is talking about Gentiles coming to be saved and Israel being kind of cast away, but it says that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may rise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, stubborn, rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. The children of Ephraim. Now, Ephraim, we know Ephraim was given the blessing of the fullness of the Gentiles.
Where was that? Where is that? Do you know?
Psalm 78:9.
No, where does that happen?
That happens
Do you know?
in Genesis. I have to find it, but that's where Israel finally goes after the famine, goes to, or during the famine, to Egypt, and finally meets Joseph, who was supposedly dead for 20 years, and meets his two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he gives them the blessing.
Okay, yeah.
But he gives the younger son the better blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Tells Ephraim that he'll be the fullness of the Gentiles or nations. But there's something in 78, if I could find it, because it's a pretty long.
Well, it's kind of similar to the whole Jacob and Esau.
That's part of, when we get to those parables in Luke 15 and 16, I definitely want to go over the younger, older son theme that runs throughout
Right.
the Bible, how the younger son always gets the blessing.
Yeah.
The younger son represents the Gentiles.
How many times does that happen? Do you know throughout the scriptures?
It's not a lot from what I can remember, but it's definitely a few significant times. It's think of Ishmael. Ishmael's the firstborn, right? But Isaac becomes the son of promise.
Yeah.
Then you have Jacob, Esau. Esau is the firstborn, but he gives up his birthright. And Jacob, his name means the supplanter. So he represents the second son who actually gets the blessing. Even though he's a deceiver, he gets it. And then he gets a new name, which I think represents the church, who gets a new name called the Israel, or the New Jerusalem, like in Revelation. Who else? Ephraim and Manasseh. I think there's more.
I think there is too.
But you'll see how this is important with the parable of the prodigal son. Because the parable of the prodigal son is the younger brother. And he is lost, but becomes found. So he represents, in the parable, he represents Gentiles. But in this Psalm 78, and I can't find it because it's such a big psalm. Hang on, I'm going to do a little, instead of looking through it, table. Psalm 78:19. It says, talking about Israel, he also brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers, but they sinned even more against him by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness. And they tested God in their heart by asking for the food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke against God. They said, "Can God prepare a table in the wilderness?" Now, that might not seem like much, but I don't know. There's something about this that always gets me when I read it. I think the table in the wilderness is Christ. And the same thing happens in John when he's about to feed, I think it's John, when he's about to feed the 5,000. Let me see if I can find this really quick. Because the disciples ask a question that almost sounds exactly like that. They ask the question, can Jesus feed all these people here in the desert? I think it's John 6. Hang on. I don't know if it's John. I wish I knew where it was. Or is it Mark? Maybe it's Mark 8.
I don't think it's in John or in. Doesn't say anything like that at the beginning of John.
Oh. Yeah, it's Mark 8:4.
Mark what?
Mark 8:4. Now this is before he's going to feed, I think, the 4,000, or is it the 5 again? Let's see. Anyway, the disciples answer him, how can one satisfy these people with bread? Oh, the word is wilderness. Do you see the parallel between Mark 8:4 and Psalm 78:19?
Psalms did you say Psalm 78:19?
Yeah.
Mine is not saying that.
So in Psalm 78:19 it says,
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. I see it.
They spoke against God. They said, can God prepare a table in the wilderness?
Mm-hmm.
And in Mark 8, the disciples answer him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? So I just found it interesting when I found that this psalm is talking about the parables and how Jesus would always speak in parables, yet he's going to feed people in the wilderness. So it kind of reminds me of, like, in Hosea chapter 2, it says that there'll be it speaks against Israel and that their new moons and festivals and feast days will end. But then it says he'll make a covenant with them in the wilderness. So I take that to mean Gentiles. So Jesus provides a table in the wilderness. Feeding of the 5,000 is really not about food. It's about Gentiles getting saved and about Israel not being saved because they're being spoken to in parables and they're being blinded.
I always kind of was interested in this parable, Mark 8. When again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat.
Meaning,
What?
I'm sorry, what did you just say, Lauren?
Well, just reading it, it says, when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat. He called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. What is that 3 days significant? You know, I just think everything is kind of significant, but
Yeah, I don't know. I think that way too, but sometimes I just can't imagine what it really means.
yeah. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, how can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have?
Well, far away, like
would that be considered Gentiles, do you think?
I think it's a picture of Gentiles. What's happening there is in Israel, of course, but it's alluding to what's going to happen in that Gentiles, the world is going to get saved. Jesus is the bread. You know, so he feeds the 5,000 and the 4,000. And like I've said before, each time the fragments of the bread are put in 12 baskets.
This one's not, though. This one's...
No, But in Mark 8, Jesus asks them, how many baskets were the fragments put in when I fed the 4,000? 7. How many when I fed the 5,000? 12. So he's saying in the code form, the 12 apostles are the remnant. Like the fragments of bread that are left over are put into 12 baskets. And then
But this one's only 7 baskets of leftovers.
right, but 7 is also a very significant number when it comes to the idea of a remnant, because when the prophet, and why can't I think of his name? When the prophet prayed, I can't. His name will come to me. They've killed all of them, and I'm the only one left. You know which? Albert, which prophet is it? I can't think of his name. Elijah.
Yeah, you're talking about a lot. The greatest of the prophets, right?
Exactly. When Elijah prays, Elijah thought that Israel was finished. He thought all of them were dead. He's the only one left. So God answered and he says, no. I have a remnant of 7,000 that has not bowed the knee to Baal. So God said, I have a remnant of 7,000. So in one case with Elijah, there's a remnant of 7,000. In the other case, while Jesus is there, there's a remnant of 12 apostles. So that's what I think the 7 and the 12 represent. They're the remnant. So the food that gets placed into the 12 baskets, when Jesus does that, he says, place them in the baskets that none is lost, which is a really weird thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then he goes on to talk about the apostles that were given eyes to see and ears to hear. And he said, and he prays to God, to the Father in the garden, I have lost none of those that you have given me.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're the remnant.
Right.
He even says in John 6, when he's talking to the Pharisees and the apostles are sitting next to him, he says, of all that come to me, I will lose none.
Mm-hmm.
But he just said, put the fragments in the baskets that none is lost. So the none that's being lost is not bread. It's the ones that he chose.
So the 12 baskets, the remnants in the 12 baskets, you believe represents the 12 tribes.
The 12 apostles, which represent the 12 tribes.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Yeah.
And they are the remnant.
Right.
And that's when Paul says, if he hadn't left us a very small remnant, we would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole nation would have been destroyed. And then people could say replacement theology. But Paul is saying, no, you can't call it replacement theology because God didn't destroy Israel. He saved the remnant out of her. And that's the seed through which all of you are born because they preach the word and you believe.
Right.
So they're the remnant. And when Paul says, has God cast away his people? No, look at me. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
He's not saying, no, he hasn't cast away his people. He's going to save them all. He's not saying that. He says, no, God hasn't cast away his people. Yeah. I'm saved and I'm Jewish.
What do you think the few small fish represent?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess it would be the fact that it's like a mustard seed that starts out small and grows. Which takes you back to the kingdom. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, even though, like Jesus prays in John 17 to the Father, of all you have given me, I have lost none save Judas, that the scripture might be fulfilled. He also, in the next chapter, when he gets arrested, he says to the centurions, "You found me. Let these go." And there's only 11 there now because Judas was the betrayer. and then the writer of the gospel comments. John comments and he says that the saying might not the prophecy, but that the saying might be fulfilled. Of all you have given me, I have lost none.
Right.
And it's a saying because it wasn't a prophecy. It's what Jesus had said in John 6.
Mm-hmm.
So that proves that the ones that are given to Jesus are not like some elect, some Calvinistic elect throughout all of history. The ones who were specifically given to Jesus were the apostles.
Yeah.
That's why Jesus said, of all those, no man can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them. It's the same ones that are given. I just thought that was interesting with the psalm, because it talks about a table in the wilderness, and in Mark 8, Jesus is feeding the people in the wilderness. And it's like when the question is asked, can God provide a table in the wilderness? It's like, can God save the world?
Right.
And Jesus is the table. He's the bread.
Mm-hmm. Albert, you still sleeping? Albert. No.
I guess he is. The next verse in Psalm 78 is verse 20, says, "Behold, he struck the rock so that the waters gushed out." Jesus said, "I'm the water of life," right? And the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide meat for his people? It says, "Therefore the Lord heard this and was furious. So a fire was kindled against Jacob," 70 AD, "and anger also came up against Israel, but because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation." Now, it also talks about the manna here. "Yet he had commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained down manna on them to eat, and given them the bread of heaven." So that's like John 6. Again, Jesus says to them, "Your forefathers ate the manna in the wilderness and they're dead. But I am the true bread, and you have to eat me." That's when they all leave him,
Mm-hmm.
even the disciples. But he's basically talking about, you got to believe in me.
Yeah. Yeah, I just started reading John again. It's there was a couple of, I don't think I wrote them down. If I don't have my notebook out, I don't remember anything. It was something I was looking at. My kids are going to go through my notes and go, "What is this?" I try to keep it kind of like organized as in doctrines, But I'll go through maybe one day here and go through these parables again, make notes on them.
I have so many notes in my computer, but I find it easier to try to go over it once in a while and just remember it so it's in your head. It's so much easier to pull stuff out of your head than to try to look at find it through your notes.
Yeah, that's what I do. I go over it again and again and again. And it's really interesting because I'll go through my notes and I'll think, what? No, that's not right.
Yeah, sometimes you think you see this great revelation when you go read it again. You're like, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. Sometimes you don't think you see anything, and then you see something.
But with dispensationalism, like I am so grateful I studied it. I mean, I really studied it and I really enjoyed studying it. But I just thought it was interesting that I got into New Covenant theology first. And then that pastor said that to me. So I had been reading it for quite a while, or I wouldn't have mentioned it to him. And then he said, no, that's replacement theology. You want to stay away from that. That'll, you know. And so I kind of had a lot of respect for him, and I just kind of backed off of it. And then I started studying dispensationalism, and I'm really glad I did, because you can't, unless you know what you actually really believe and why you're believing it, you can't study something else and see a difference. It's very difficult.
Well, yeah, and if you hold any kind of Bible study, you can't explain to people why certain things are wrong if you haven't studied it.
Yeah,
Like best Bible teachers can give you both sides
yeah,
and then tell you why this one's wrong and that one's right.
yeah. I don't know. You know, I just don't understand. If everybody's after God, why don't people study more aspects, more views, opposing views, that kind of thing? I mean, don't people, you know, maybe I'm just thinking about big time preachers and stuff. They got a lot to lose, I guess, if they do change their stances. But, but is it just pride that holds one there? Stubbornness
Who knows?
that you can't actually see it?
Sometimes you just taught it in seminary and you just think that's right. There's no need to study the other stuff. Those people are heretics, you know.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
guess.
how they talk too.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, the open theist. There's so many people that rail against open theism and they don't even know what it's about.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I agree with that. I mean, but a lot of people will call people heretics for just the smallest thing. You know, like, oh, that's a heresy. This is a heresy. That's a heresy. Holy cow. I was a long gone heretic. I'm probably worse now, though. I'd like to talk to some of my family about this, but you know what? It never comes up. Christianity, God never comes up, even though we're all believers.
Well,
It's
that's,
the weirdest thing, huh?
yep. Yeah, I know.
It just, I would love to talk to them about it, but the defense is just the wall comes up, and my brother, he gets a look in his eyes like,
Because you're a heretic, right? I can't talk to my brother about stuff. He thinks I'm a heretic.
why can't you just discuss it?
When I tell him Israel's not going to get saved as a nation,
Snaps.
he looks at me. Yeah, he does snap. He really does.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't think I would say that to my brother. I would go around it somehow. I don't think I would say that,
And
because that
and
would just shut him down right away.
and why do you have to defend it so much? Like even if you
Well,
really
because they believe that, I mean, if you're not for Israel, you're, I don't even know.
God's going to curse you.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're cursed, right? My girlfriend said that to me not too long ago.
But it really messes up the whole theology that you're supposed to believe, because the whole Bible is about the difference between faith and works. And that's why Paul goes on and on and on. Like, you know, those of the law, if those of the law be heirs, then, you know, faith is made void and the promise of none effect. He goes on and on about, like, you know, how circumcision means nothing, how the law is abolished. All right, so why is God going to save the people of the law? Like, don't you get it? Like, that whole thing was a shadow. The whole thing
Yeah.
was an object lesson on how to get saved, and that's by faith.
I don't
And,
think that I ever seen the real theme of the Bible at all, though. You know, it's probably only in the last year where I've actually started to see themes.
Oh, I didn't see it either till I gave up dispensationalism.
Yeah.
And then the whole reason for the Bible opened up. And then all these little things, these little nuances started popping out,
Hmm.
all because of giving up dispensationalism. That thing kept me from seeing all this stuff.
I know. Yeah.
It's like a virus in a computer because you don't see what God really had in store. It's like watching a movie and you don't know the ending, and yet you keep watching it over and over again and you still don't understand the ending.
Yeah.
I mean, when Paul literally says, "Why didn't they get it?
What's
Why
that?
didn't when Paul says, "Why didn't Israel get it?" And then he explains, because they sought it as if it were by the works of the law. But the Gentiles, they got it by faith. I mean, that's it. Just
Mhm.
believe that. So one day God is going to save Jews. We don't know if it's going to be just the ones living, or if every Jew who ever lived, or anybody who's got a spot of Jewish blood in them. But he's going to save all the Jews without faith. He's just going to zap them.
You know, I still struggle with where people say that you can lose your salvation. I still struggle with that. I know a lot of Christians that believe that, you know, if you're um, struggling in life and you happen to die at that moment, you're not saved. It's just so,
Oh, I think you can lose your salvation, but not for that reason.
yeah, you believe from belief, right?
It's belief only. Like,
Yeah.
there's only one way to be saved, and there's only one way to lose your salvation, and it has to do with belief and belief only.
But you know, I think there's even a few on our panel that don't they believe that if you're misbehaving or you're not walking right with the Lord, that you can lose your salvation?
I don't know. I don't know who would believe that. I can't think of anybody who would believe that. I don't see most of the guys, not most, but Stacy, Zach, who else? No, just Stacy and Zach. They're uh, Calvinists.
Uh-huh.
And in Calvinism, you can't lose your salvation. You've been chosen from before the foundation.
Right.
So it's
But
the
what if
key.
God decides that he doesn't want you no more?
Well, God in Calvinism, God doesn't change his mind. The decree was made before the foundation, and God's not even free to change it. So you can't lose your salvation in Calvinism. You can only lose it if there's free will.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, because I just can't see it being done on behavior, because none of us would be here.
Exactly. You have to stop believing. You have to give up your faith. You have to renounce your faith in Christ, which I've seen people do.
Yeah.
But
But
then they'll go and they'll say, well, they were never saved.
that's what lots of people say.
Yeah, they just acted like Christians for 20 years, but they weren't saved, you know?
But Christianity can be a way of life, right? I mean, if you're born and raised into it and
Oh,
you
yeah.
just assume you're a Christian.
Yeah, you can be a Christian name only for sure.
Yeah.
But I know a guy who I know was saved,
Yeah, you told me about him.
and he renounced Christ.
That has to be a gradual falling away, doesn't it?
I think it was. It took a
Like
while.
like really. But you know, I think that a lot of people say that they will renounce Christ, but I think it has everything to do with living in sin. I don't know if that's true, but I know how I was. Mind you, I don't think I ever came close to not believing in God, like not believing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we all sin. I
Yeah,
had an affair and left my ex. You know,
yeah.
never stopped believing in Christ.
Did you feel like the hammer was going to come down though?
On no,
You didn't?
no,
Oh man, I did. When I
no.
left mine. Oh, Mind you, I was told the hammer was going to come down.
But the hammer of who?
God.
Of God. Oh, okay. No, because from day one, my faith has always been so strong in God that it doesn't matter what I went through in life. I'm like, if you really believe that you're saved despite your sin because you believe, then how can you believe that you're going to lose your salvation?
I didn't believe that though. I believed that I was saved. I don't know if I ever actually put much thought into it so much as I believed I was saved as long as I was behaving, I guess.
Right. Well,
I don't know.
that's a lordship. That's a lordship salvation, a work
Absolutely.
based.
That's what I was raised under. Or
Yeah.
not raised, but came to know.
No, I always believed that it was by faith and faith alone, and you could only lose your salvation by. Well, I didn't believe you could lose your salvation until 5-6 years ago.
Hmm.
I mean, it's plain. Paul says, in Romans, Israel was cut off, and you can be cut off too. But he says if they believe, well, they could be grafted back in again,
Hmm.
but not as a nation. He's talking about individually.
Yeah.
So that one scripture alone, I mean, there's more, but that one alone proves that, you can lose your salvation.
Hmm. I've gone through times, where I always believed that Jesus died for me, but I questioned so much. When I come out of that church, it took me years to really even put the slightest bit of trust in God that he wasn't out to crush me, so to speak. And I think that's some of people's biggest thing is, they look in the world and they go, really, that God allows this? God does this? You know? And
Yeah.
it's probably only in the last couple of years where I see it as man being the evil ones.
Well, because you believe in free will. Imagine if you believe that God was predetermining all this stuff. I mean,
Oh, I struggled with that for quite a while too.
I just don't get it. How can you believe God is it's one thing. The atheist looks at the world and says, how can you believe in a God that allows all of this to happen? And that would be bad enough. But then the other atheist who knows what Calvinism is all about says, how on earth could you believe God predestined all this stuff? That's even worse.
Yeah. 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 Oh yeah. Like when I think of Calvinism, it makes me feel very distant from him.
Well, that's one thing I never even remotely believed in. Not even a little bit.
I went through it. I can remember when this was just before I left the Bible study. Actually, I think I had almost left. And then I really started studying Calvinism. But I didn't study the opposite end of it. Does that make sense? Like I didn't study the opposing views. And
The free will?
yeah, like I didn't study any of it. And um, that's kind of what I had always believed. But then I came to Calvinism, and these guys on the panel can be pretty convincing, right? And I thought, well, okay, Lord, like if that's what you want me to believe, and
In Calvinism?
yeah.
No, I don't think they're convincing at all.
Well, when you don't know, they are.
Hope you guys are listening.
And anyway, I said, okay, Lord, I will. I'll believe if that's what you, but I want. Anyway, I was actually spiritually sick for 3 days,
Yeah,
and
I can
it's
see that.
okay. I guess I can't really believe that.
That's a hard pill to swallow. You have
Yeah.
to just believe that the scriptures are teaching that, whether you like it or not.
I
It
actually
doesn't.
felt like the carpet was being pulled out from underneath me. You know, like I was like, oh, well, I don't really see the point in anything then. Like,
Like
why do
Greg,
I have to take part?
like Greg, like Greg Boyd tells a story of when he gives a lecture on. He was a young guy when he did that, but he tells a story of how, you know, this young Christian girl's life went completely wrong, and she thought God was answering her prayers with a guy, and he cheats, and
Oh, I did. I watched that.
yeah, very good story. And
Wow.
you know, for the Calvinist, it's like, you know, hey, that's the way God wanted it. You know, deal with it. But
Mhm.
for the free will guy who's pastoring, he says, well, you know what? Maybe God, you know, thought that guy was a good match too. And maybe God didn't plan for this to happen. Maybe God didn't actually want this to happen. Maybe there's free will, and you
Right.
shouldn't be blaming God. You know, and when he told that to the girl, he said, uh, he he had some success with her pastorally, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it, you know,
Well, I often think about that. I think about, you know, like somebody said to me one day, so how about your life? How has it been? You know, I said, well, 4 kids and a divorce. If you know, it wasn't something I chose, I would have chosen for my life. But now that I've gone through it, I probably wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't gone through it. But I made those choices. You know, I chose to marry that man, and I had lots of red flags.
or you could say if you're the Calvinist, but everything happened for a reason.
Well,
And it's so funny. I asked Stacy, like, because Stacy would say something like, well, everything happens for a reason. And I'd say, well, what's the reason? Well, you have to learn something. And I'd say, well, if Calvinism is true, what is it that you have to learn? Shouldn't you just know everything you're supposed to know? Weren't you predestined to know what you're going to know? What do you got to learn? It makes no sense. Like, no matter how you keep trying to explain it, in my mind, it fails philosophically every time.
it also fails when you hear people say, um, God has that person for you. So my daughter here, she's 23 years old. I filled her head with that crap. And she goes, well, what if he's not the one for me? And
Right.
I,
Like
and
number
I thought,
one.
yeah. And so I stopped and I thought, you know what? You have a good head on your shoulders. You know whether somebody's for you or not. If you choose to marry somebody because of whatever reason, and you know you've already got those red flags, you're the one who should listen to yourself. So I think that there's a lot of I think it paralyzes Christians.
Yeah, it probably paralyzes a lot of ones that believe in it that don't realize why they're being paralyzed.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think it did that to me in my life.
So
I could never make a choice. What if it was the wrong one? Well, so what if it's the wrong one?
right, it's all predetermined by God anyway. So
Either predetermined or, you know, God has that special person. Well, maybe he doesn't.
I got a brother-in-law who drives my sister crazy because he's a Calvinist, and he's a pretty religious Christian, much more religious than me. They go to church every week. They're involved in the church, and he's got a fast motorbike, and he's kind of a risk taker. And he thinks nothing of, like, you know, riding his motorcycle 80 miles an hour in the rain.
That's crazy.
And he just thinks, you know, when his time is up, it's up. It doesn't matter, you know, what he does.
Yeah.
So that's
Isn't there scriptures about people dying early? Like dying before their time and things like that?
I don't know of any offhand.
Because the only really thing that even points to that is it is appointed unto man once to die, right?
Right.
But it doesn't really say appointed a time to die.
Right. It's appointed that you die once. That's what
Mhm.
that means.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, I should get off here.
me too. Yeah, it's late. It's late
Lunch
over
for
here.
tomorrow.
So
All right.
parables on Friday.
What's that?
Parables on Friday.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Good night. Night, Albert.
Albert's sleeping.
I think so.